On the proceeding crossroad, turn left. My GPS guide monotonously relayed to me as I hazardously drove my Honda Civic down the narrow and pitch-black roads of Swan Vale, a vast woodland town located up in the mountains of northeastern Pennsylvania. As my engine puttered and my tires squeaked, I tried my best to scan the road ahead of me to spot the crossroad in advance, to which I barely could thanks to the branches that stretched high above the road and shielded the tarmac from moonlight. My saving grace was my crappy headlights that barely illuminated the forthcoming track. I did as my GPS requested, and once I completed the turn, I could hear a headache revving up in my head as I was greeted with yet another long, tight roadway with seemingly no end. I gripped my teeth and let out hiss of pent-up frustration, tightening my grip on the steering wheel as I begrudgingly awaited the GPS to inform me of which turn to make next. I hated these roads with a burning passion, yet I sadly had to put up with them if I wanted to continue visiting my daughter. She and her husband moved to Swan Vale a year ago to start a family, and ever since then I've been visiting at least once a week. It isn't an easy task. It's about a 5-hour drive to get there and back from where I live, and I'm an old man. Yet despite that, I always make it a point to visit, regardless of how long it takes. 2 months ago, my daughter gave birth to a young healthy girl, and so I'd been visiting more frequently, and thus, I had to encounter Swan Vale's road network more frequently. The roads that lead in and out of Swan Vale may have well been designed by the devil himself. That may sound melodramatic, but I wholeheartedly believe whoever designed the road network designed it with the pure intent of inflicting psychological torment on those who drive it. The roads are fine during the day when the sun hangs in the sky, but when night falls and I'm attempting to leave town, that's when the roads become my personal hell. Up is down, right is up, down is left. My mind is swept up in the jumble. That is the intertwining and identical roads of Swan Vale's road network, until eventually it's morning, and only then do I find my way out. So, much to the encouragement of my daughter, I ordered myself a GPS. I left the responsibility of leading me out of town to it, and for the first 2 weeks, they were like a gift from God. No more did I spend entire nights circling the outer woods of Swan Vale with no sense of direction. Instead, I was now managing to leave the town in a matter of minutes with the help of the GPS's mapping function and directions. Soon, I found myself fully relying on it and trusting its every word. Until that night, on the proceeding crossroad, continue straight. I'd been driving for 2 hours, and irritation was beginning to spike in me as an exit was still nowhere in sight. Unusual for my beloved GPS, to the point I began to believe it was busted. But upon examining it, it seemed to be functioning well. I then considered the possibility that maybe it had mistakenly taken a longer route. But as the roads grew narrower and my surroundings became more darker than I thought possible, I soon concluded that it was leading me further into the forest than away from it. On the proceeding crossroad, turn right. I sighed and began to slowly spin my steering wheel to the right. I was almost at my wit's end and contemplating whether to just head back and find my own way out, when I soon found out that the GPS's instruction hadn't ended yet. Crackling through the GPS speaker came a deep, hushed voice unlike its usual robotic one. And feed me. I slammed the brakes instantly, jolting forward in my seat and nearly smashing my head off the dashboard as my car came to a sudden, violent halt. At first, I thought someone had snuck into my car and whispered into my ear from the back seat, due to how unfamiliar and close the voice sounded. So, I frantically looked around my car for the perpetrator, until eventually pinning it to the GPS. I soon glanced forward through my windshield and registered what was stood in front of my car. Darkness. That may sound obvious. Of course there would be darkness. It was night. But this darkness was not your average sort. Not the sort you can shine a light at to make it dissipate. No, this darkness was absolute and foreign. Like it had a form, despite it being just the absence of light. Like it was an ocean of oil, but with none of the shine or glint it usually holds. The hue of my headlights just sunk into its towering form as I gazed at it with a deep, primal sense of dread boiling in my stomach. Like I was prey to whatever was in front of me. If I hadn't slammed my brakes in that moment, I would have most surely drove head-on into that darkness that blocked the road. What I did next was idiotic in hindsight, but I suppose incomparability makes you more primed for investigation. Despite any flashing warning signs there may be, I got out of my car. My loafers thudded against the tarmac road as I approached the darkness. I stopped a few inches away from it, not that foolish to make contact with it. I stared into that vast sea of blackness that filled my view as I tried my best to understand what it was I was looking at. Then I felt it, a breeze. Not unusual for a cold January night, of course, but it wasn't a cold breeze. It was quite the opposite. Hot, parched, overwhelming to the point I had to choke back bile from shooting up my throat onto the road. It took me a few seconds to process what it truly was that just wafted onto me. As it was no breeze, it was a breath. The darkness was breathing on me. Feed me. I heard the GPS demand from back in my car. This time louder and angrier, animalistic even. My fight or flight response instantly kicked in. Immediately I raced back to my car seat, slamming the door behind me as I began to frantically reverse back the way I came. Feed me. Demands began to tumble out of the GPS's speaker in an unbroken, slurred chain. It almost sounded desperate as it did hateful. As I backed up down the road, taking the occasional hazardous glance forward, the darkness didn't move. I don't think it even could, but it did protest. Feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me. I retraced my tracks as the demands became deafening to the point one grasped the GPS and tossed it out the window. Yet the demands continued, but through the radio this time, and with more howling voices, joining the crescendo of desperate demanding. Feed us, feed us, feed us, feed us. With my head twisted around as I maneuvered backwards, I could see that down at least one road at each crossroad, there was that familiar darkness. Fear gripped me so badly in that moment I thought that my heart may fail. I recklessly swerved around the corners of each crossroad I encountered, each time in the opposite direction of the dark. Feed us. I backended the occasional tree trunk and almost nearly swerved into a couple ditches, but I kept moving until eventually I found myself in the car park of a 24/7 Steiner. Exhausted, I think I fell asleep upon finding a parking spot. As I began to doze off, I heard my radio crackle out a few words before I fell into a deep slumber. So hungry, so cold, so alone. Lost, lost, lost. Feed us. It's been 2 weeks since then, and I haven't been back to visit my daughter. As far as I am concerned, I'm not stepping foot into those woods ever again. I could hardly gather up the courage to leave during the day. Upon waking up in that parking lot, I informed my daughter about what had happened and sent photos of my busted taillights and scratched rims. But I can tell she doesn't really believe me. She probably thinks I've reached that age where I've begun to lose myself. And that very well may be the case. But recently, I decided to do a bit of digging into the road network I was traveling that night. And from what I've gathered, -1 people have went missing in those woods last year alone. But that's not what frightens me. What scares me far more than the fact they disappeared is how they all have one thing in common. Each texted a family member one word before they were never heard from again: lost. Wow, guys, that one still gives me chills. If you made it to the end, let me know you survived. Don't forget to smash that like button if you enjoyed the terror, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're creeping closer to that 1K goal, and your support means everything. Hit the bell so you never miss a nightmare-fueled upload. Stay spooky, stay safe, and remember, you might want to sleep with the lights on tonight. Until next time, peace out, if you can.